Nina Carter's alarm clock screamed at 7:30 in the morning, but she had been awake for hours. Today was the day that could change everything. The interview at the Grand Vista Hotel was her golden ticket out of the tiny apartment she shared with two roommates. She had practiced her answers 100 times, ironed her only professional outfit, and even splurged on a folder to hold her resume. Everything had to be perfect. She stepped out of her building at 8:45, giving herself plenty of time for the 9:30 interview. The morning air was crisp, and the city was alive with the usual hustle. Nina clutched her folder tightly, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. This job as an event coordinator could finally help her pay off the mountain of bills that kept her awake at night. As she hurried down Maple Street, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire, her best friend since childhood. The message read, "Good luck today! You've got this!" Nina smiled and typed a quick thank you before tucking the phone back in her purse. She increased her pace, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement, a cry for help. That was when she heard it. A voice, shaky and desperate, calling out from the side of the road. Nina's first instinct was to keep walking. She was already cutting it close with time. But something in that voice made her pause. It was the sound of genuine distress, not someone asking for money or directions. It was fear. Nina turned to see an elderly woman in a wheelchair, struggling near a storm drain. One of the wheels had slipped into a gap between the pavement and the metal grate, and the woman was trying desperately to pull herself free. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore an elegant coat that suggested she was someone accustomed to finer things. But right now she looked utterly helpless. "Please, someone help me!" the woman called again, her voice breaking. Nina glanced at her watch. 20 minutes until her interview. The hotel was 15 minutes away. She looked at the woman, then at her watch again. Her mind raced through the calculations. If she helped quickly, she might still make it. Might. "Hold on, I'm coming!" Nina called out, rushing toward the woman. The struggle up close, Nina could see the problem clearly. The wheelchair's front wheel had wedged itself into a particularly nasty gap. The woman had been trying to push herself backward, but the chair wouldn't budge. Her hands were trembling, and Nina could see tears of frustration in her eyes. "Thank you, dear. I thought everyone was just going to walk past me," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't worry. We'll get you out of here," Nina said, though she had no idea how. She crouched down and examined the wheel. It was stuck at an awkward angle, and simply pulling backward wasn't going to work. Nina tried several approaches. She pushed. She pulled. She even tried lifting the entire front of the wheelchair. Nothing worked. The minutes ticked by mercilessly. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 15. "I'm so sorry to keep you," the woman said. "You look like you have somewhere important to be." "It's okay," Nina lied, sweat beginning to form on her forehead despite the cool morning. "We'll figure this out." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nina realized she needed to tilt the wheelchair at a specific angle while pulling. It took all her strength and she nearly lost her balance twice, but at last the wheel popped free with a loud scraping sound. "There! You're free!" Nina exclaimed, breathing heavily, a grateful stranger. The woman's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Oh, thank you so much." "You're an angel. What's your name, dear?" "Nina Carter," she replied, glancing at her watch. Her heart sank. 9:35. She was already 5 minutes late. "I'm Margaret Hartwell." "Nina, how can I ever repay you?" "No need, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm just glad you're okay." "But I really have to run now. I'm late for a job interview." Margaret's expression changed to one of concern. "Oh no, where is your interview?" "Grand Vista Hotel," Nina said, already starting to back away. "That's my grandson's hotel." "Here, take my card. Call me later, please. I want to make sure you're properly thanked." Nina accepted the business card quickly, stuffed it in her pocket, and took off running. Her heels weren't made for sprinting, but she ran anyway, her folder clutched to her chest. She arrived at the Grand Vista Hotel at 9:47, completely out of breath and disheveled. Rejection and despair. The hotel lobby was magnificent, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Under different circumstances, Nina would have been in awe. But right now, all she could focus on was finding the Human Resources office. Thomas, the kind-faced doorman, pointed her in the right direction. She rushed to the office, knocked on the door, and entered. A stern woman in a sharp business suit looked up from her desk. Her nameplate read, Victoria Stone, Human Resources Manager. Her expression was cold and unwelcoming. "Miss Carter, I presume?" Victoria said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Yes! I'm so sorry I'm late. There was an emergency. An elderly woman needed help, and I couldn't just leave her there." Victoria held up her hand. "Miss Carter, we had 6 candidates for this position. 3 of them arrived 30 minutes early. 2 arrived exactly on time, and you arrived 17 minutes late. What does that tell me about your time management skills? But I can explain. I'm sure you can. Everyone has an excuse. But in the hospitality industry, we don't accept excuses. We expect professionalism. The interview process is closed. Thank you for your interest in the Grand Vista Hotel." The words hit Nina like physical blows. She tried to speak, to plead her case, but Victoria had already turned her attention back to her computer screen. Nina was dismissed. She walked out of the office in a daze. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall until she was outside. This was supposed to be her big break, and it had slipped through her fingers because she had chosen to help someone. Was kindness really worth this price? An unexpected encounter as Nina walked through the lobby, head down and fighting back tears. She heard a familiar voice. "Nina, dear, is that you?" She looked up to see Margaret Hartwell being wheeled through the lobby by a tall, impeccably dressed man. He had dark hair, sharp features, and the kind of presence that made people turn and look. Even through her despair, Nina couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. "Mrs. Hartwell," Nina said, quickly wiping at her eyes. Margaret noticed immediately. "What happened? Did you get the job?" Nina shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. The man pushing Margaret's wheelchair stopped. "Grandmother, what's going on?" "Julian, this is Nina Carter. She's the wonderful young woman who rescued me this morning when my wheelchair got stuck. Nina, this is my grandson, Julian Hartwell." Julian extended his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Nice to meet you, Miss Carter. My grandmother has been talking about you nonstop. She says you were her guardian angel." Nina managed a weak smile. "I just did what anyone would do." "But most people didn't," Margaret said pointedly. "Julian, Nina missed her job interview here because she stopped to help me. And now they've turned her away." Something changed in Julian's expression. His eyes, which had been politely friendly, now showed a spark of interest and concern. "They turned you away because you were late helping my grandmother?" "It's fine, really," Nina said quickly. "I should have managed my time better." "It was my fault." "Nonsense," Margaret declared. "Julian, I want you to do something about this." Julian looked at his grandmother, then at Nina. There was an intensity in his gaze that made Nina's breath catch. "What position were you interviewing for?" "Event coordinator," Nina replied quietly. "Come with me," Julian said decisively. "Both of you." And just like that, Nina's terrible morning took an unexpected turn. As Julian led them toward the elevator, she had no idea that the stranger she had helped would become the person who changed her entire life. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like it lasted forever. Nina stood between Margaret and Julian, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now. She could feel Julian's presence beside her, calm and confident, while she felt like a complete mess. Her hair had come loose from running, her makeup was probably smudged from almost crying, and her carefully chosen outfit was wrinkled. The elevator doors opened to reveal a stunning executive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Julian gestured for them to enter. The space was sophisticated yet welcoming, with leather chairs, modern artwork, and a massive desk that somehow didn't feel intimidating. "Please, sit down," Julian said, his voice warm but professional. He helped his grandmother settle her wheelchair near the desk before taking his own seat. Nina perched on the edge of a chair, clutching her folder like a lifeline. Julian leaned back in his chair, studying Nina with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Carter. What made you want to work at the Grand Vista Hotel?" Nina took a deep breath. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. For the next 20 minutes, she told him about her background in art and design, her passion for creating memorable experiences, and her vision for what events could be. She showed him her portfolio, filled with sketches and plans for events she had organized on tiny budgets during college. Julian listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. Margaret watched them both with a knowing smile that Nina didn't quite understand. When Nina finished, Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Carter, I'm going to be honest with you. We already filled the event coordinator position this morning. However, I'm creating a new position. I want someone to handle our high-end private events and work directly with our VIP clients. The job would include planning everything from intimate dinners to elaborate celebrations. Would you be interested?" Nina's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "I don't joke about business," Julian replied, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips. "The salary is competitive, and you'd have a full team to support you. When can you start?" "Tomorrow," Nina said, then immediately felt embarrassed by her enthusiasm. "I mean, whenever you need me?" "Tomorrow is perfect," Julian said, standing and extending his hand. "Welcome to the Grand Vista Hotel, Miss Carter. New beginnings and old friends." Nina left the hotel walking on air. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She immediately called Claire, who screamed so loudly that Nina had to pull the phone away from her ear. "I told you something good would happen," Claire exclaimed. "We have to celebrate. Come to my place tonight. I want to hear everything." That evening, Nina sat in Claire's cozy apartment recounting the entire story. Claire, who worked as a teacher at a local elementary school, listened with wide eyes and kept interrupting with excited questions. "So this Julian guy is not only rich and owns the hotel, but he's also gorgeous, and he created a job just for you?" Claire squealed. "Nina, this is like something out of a movie." "It's not like that," Nina protested, though she felt her cheeks warming. "He was just being kind because I helped his grandmother. Girl, he could have given you any job. But he created a special position working with VIP clients. That means you'll be working closely with him. Don't you see what's happening here?" Nina shook her head, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach whenever she thought about Julian's intense gaze. First day challenges the next morning. Nina arrived at the Grand Vista Hotel 30 minutes early. She wore her best dress and had spent extra time on her hair and makeup. Thomas, the doorman, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team, Miss Carter," he said kindly. "Mr. Hartwell is a good man. You'll do well here." "Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot." Julian met her in the lobby and gave her a tour of the entire hotel. He introduced her to the staff, showed her the event spaces, and explained the hotel's philosophy of creating unforgettable experiences. Nina was impressed by how he knew everyone's name and asked about their families. This wasn't just a job for him. He genuinely cared about the hotel and the people who worked there. "This is your office," Julian said, opening a door to a beautiful space with a view of the garden. "I had it prepared for you yesterday afternoon. If you need anything changed, just let me know." Nina walked around the room, touching the desk, the comfortable chair, the shelf that was already stocked with event planning books. "It's perfect." "Thank you, Julian." He smiled, and for a moment their eyes met. Nina felt that flutter again. "I'll let you get settled in. We have a meeting at 2 to discuss your first project." The enemy within Nina spent the morning organizing her office and reviewing the hotel's past events. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice someone standing in her doorway until the person cleared their throat loudly. Nina looked up to see Victoria Stone, the HR manager who had rejected her the day before. Victoria's expression was a mixture of shock and anger. "Miss Carter, what are you doing in this office?" "I work here," Nina said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm the new VIP events coordinator." Victoria's face turned red. "That position doesn't exist." "It does now. Mr. Hartwell created it yesterday." For a moment, Victoria looked like she might explode. Then she composed herself, though her eyes remained cold. "I see. Well, welcome to the team. I'm sure we'll be working together very closely." The way she said it made it sound more like a threat than a welcome. Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Nina sat back in her chair, her good mood slightly dampened. She had a feeling Victoria Stone was going to be a problem. Growing closer, the afternoon meeting went better than Nina could have hoped. Julian presented her with her first assignment. A wealthy couple wanted to renew their vows at the hotel in 3 weeks, and they wanted something spectacular. Nina's mind immediately filled with ideas. Over the next few days, Nina threw herself into planning the event. She worked long hours, often staying late into the evening. Julian frequently stopped by her office to check on her progress, and those visits became the highlight of her day. One evening, she was so focused on creating a seating chart that she didn't notice how late it had gotten until Julian knocked on her door. "Nina, it's almost 9. Have you eaten dinner?" She looked up startled. "Is it really that late? Come on. I'm ordering food for both of us. You can't work on an empty stomach." They ate together in his office, talking about the event but also about their lives. Nina learned that Julian had taken over the hotel after his father passed away 3 years ago. He had been working non-stop ever since, trying to honor his father's legacy while also making the hotel his own. "My grandmother thinks I work too much," Julian admitted. "She says I need to remember there's more to life than business." "She sounds wise," Nina said. "She is. She's also very determined. When she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her." He paused, looking at Nina with an expression that made her heart skip. "She hasn't stopped talking about you since the day you helped her." "She says you have a beautiful soul." Nina felt herself blushing. "She's very kind. She's also usually right about people. Sabotage attempts as." The days passed. Nina noticed that small things kept going wrong. Files would go missing from her desk. Emails she sent wouldn't reach their recipients. Vendors would call saying they had received conflicting instructions about the event. At first, Nina thought she was just making mistakes from being new. But then Thomas pulled her aside one afternoon. "Miss Carter, I don't like to gossip, but I think you should know. I've seen Miss Stone going into your office when you're at lunch, and she's been telling the other managers that you only got this job because of personal connections, not because of your skills." Nina's stomach sank. So Victoria was actively trying to sabotage her. "What should I do?" Nina asked. Thomas smiled kindly. "You keep doing your excellent work. The truth always comes out. And Mr. Hartwell is no fool. He'll see through her games." Nina took Thomas's advice and focused on making the vow renewal ceremony absolutely perfect. She spent hours with the couple, understanding their love story and incorporating meaningful details into every aspect of the event. She also spent more time with Margaret, who had insisted on meeting for tea every week. The elderly woman was delightful, full of stories about Julian's childhood and wisdom about life and love. "My grandson is special," Margaret said one afternoon. "He's been hurt before. A woman he trusted betrayed him for his money. Since then, he's built walls around his heart. But I see the way he looks at you, Nina. Those walls are starting to crack." Nina didn't know what to say. She had feelings for Julian, feelings that grew stronger every day. But she was afraid of reading too much into his kindness. He was her boss after all, and she was just the girl he had given a chance to. The event approaches. The week before the vow renewal ceremony, Victoria made her boldest move yet. She called the florist and canceled the entire flower order, claiming there had been a change of plans. Fortunately, the florist called Nina to confirm, and Nina was able to fix the situation. But it was a close call. That evening, Julian called Nina into his office. Her heart pounded, worried that Victoria had somehow convinced him that Nina was incompetent. But instead, Julian said, "Nina, I need to tell you something. I've been hearing reports about Victoria's behavior toward you. I want you to know that I'm handling it. And I want to apologize for not noticing sooner." "You don't need to apologize," Nina said. "I can handle Victoria. I know you can. You're strong and talented, but you shouldn't have to deal with that kind of treatment." He stood and walked around his desk, leaning against it so he was closer to her. "Nina, these past few weeks working with you, getting to know you, has been incredible. You bring light into this place, into my life." Nina's breath caught. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "Julian," she whispered. Before either of them could say more, his phone rang. It was an emergency with one of the other properties. Julian had to leave immediately, and the moment was lost. But as Nina walked back to her office, she knew something had changed between them. Something beautiful and terrifying and full of possibility. The vow renewal ceremony was in 3 days. After that, Nina knew everything would be different. The night of the vow renewal ceremony arrived with perfect weather. The hotel's rooftop garden had been transformed into a romantic paradise. White roses and twinkling lights created an enchanted atmosphere. Soft music played as guests arrived, and every detail was exactly as Nina had planned. She stood near the entrance, checking her tablet one last time. Her emerald green dress flowed elegantly as she moved, coordinating with her team. Everything had to be perfect. This was her first major event, and she had poured her heart into it. Julian appeared beside her, looking stunning in a tailored black suit. "You've outdone yourself, Nina. This is breathtaking." "Thank you," she said, feeling warmth spread through her chest at his praise. "I just hope the couple loves it. They will. How could they not?" His hand brushed against hers, sending electricity through her entire body. The ceremony began at sunset. The couple stood under an arch covered in white flowers, renewing the promises they had made 30 years earlier. Nina watched from the side, tears forming in her eyes. This was why she loved her job. She got to be part of these beautiful moments, helping people celebrate their love. She glanced at Julian and found him watching her instead of the ceremony. When their eyes met, he smiled, and in that moment, Nina knew. She was completely in love with him, confrontation and truth as. The ceremony ended and guests moved to the reception area. Nina was coordinating the dinner service when Victoria appeared, her face twisted with anger. "Enjoying your little triumph?" Victoria hissed, pulling Nina aside. "You think you're so special. You manipulated your way into this job using that old woman. Everyone knows you're nothing but an opportunist." Before Nina could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "That's enough. Victoria." They both turned to see Julian standing there, his expression cold and authoritative. Behind him stood Margaret in her wheelchair, and beside her was Thomas, the doorman. "Mr. Hartwell, I was just—" Victoria started, but Julian raised his hand. "I know exactly what you were doing. Thomas has been documenting your attempts to sabotage Nina's work for weeks. The canceled flower orders, the missing files, the rumors you've been spreading." Julian's voice was calm but firm. "I gave you chances to prove yourself as a professional, Victoria. Instead, you chose jealousy and sabotage." Victoria's face went pale. "You can't fire me. I've been here for 5 years. You're right. I'm not firing you. I'm giving you a choice. You can resign with a decent reference, or I can terminate you for workplace harassment and sabotage. Which would you prefer?" Victoria looked around, seeing that several staff members had gathered. Her reign of intimidation was over. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the hotel. Nina stood there, stunned. Julian turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay? You didn't have to do that," Nina said quietly. "Yes, I did. Nobody treats my staff that way." "Nobody treats you that way." The emphasis on the last sentence made Nina's heart race. Margaret's confession, after the guests left and the cleanup was underway. Margaret insisted that Nina and Julian join her for champagne in the hotel's private lounge. Nina was exhausted but happy. The event had been a complete success, and the couple had thanked her with tears of joy. "To Nina," Margaret said, raising her glass, "for creating magic tonight." They clinked glasses, and Nina took a sip of the expensive champagne. She was about to excuse herself to go home when Margaret set down her glass and looked at both of them with a mischievous smile. "I have a confession to make," Margaret announced. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Grandmother, what did you do?" "That day my wheelchair got stuck." "It wasn't an accident." Nina and Julian both stared at her in confusion. Margaret continued, looking thoroughly pleased with herself. "I saw you walking, Nina, with that blue folder and that determined look. I could tell you were on your way to something important, and I thought to myself, here's a young woman with purpose. So I deliberately positioned my wheelchair over that storm drain." "You what?" Julian exclaimed. "I wanted to see what kind of person you were, Nina. Would you stop to help an old woman, even if it cost you something? Most people walked right past me that morning. But you stopped. You fought with that stubborn wheel for 20 minutes, sweating and struggling, even though you knew you'd be late." Nina's mouth fell open. "You mean I ruined my interview for a test?" "Not ruined, dear. Redirected. Margaret smiled warmly. I knew my Julian needed someone special in his life. Someone kind, genuine, and selfless. Someone who would choose compassion over ambition. When you helped me without hesitation, I knew you were that person. Julian ran his hand through his hair, shaking his head in disbelief. Grandmother, you manipulated us. I gave you an opportunity to meet someone wonderful, Margaret corrected. What you did with that opportunity was entirely up to you. And look how beautifully things turned out. Nina didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All of this, the job, everything, was part of a matchmaking scheme? The job is real, Nina. You earned that with your talent and hard work, Julian said firmly. My grandmother may have orchestrated our meeting, but everything else has been genuine. Your success here has nothing to do with how we met. Margaret wheeled closer to Nina and took her hand. I've watched you both over these past weeks. The way Julian smiles when he talks about you. The way you light up when he enters a room. I may have brought you together, but the love growing between you is all your own. A declaration of love. The word love hung in the air between them. Margaret excused herself, claiming she was tired, but her knowing smile suggested otherwise. The doorman appeared to escort her out, leaving Nina and Julian alone in the lounge. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Julian stood and walked to where Nina sat, extending his hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her back to the rooftop garden. The guests were gone, but the lights still twinkled like stars. The city spread out before them, a sea of lights and possibility. Nina, I need to tell you something, Julian began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. My grandmother was right. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I've had in years. At first, I thought I was just impressed by your work ethic and creativity, but somewhere along the way, it became so much more. He took both her hands in his, and Nina felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. I love the way you care about every detail. I love how you make everyone around you feel valued. I love your kindness, your passion, your beautiful soul. Nina Carter, I am completely and hopelessly in love with you. Tears spilled down Nina's cheeks. Julian, I love you too. I think I started falling for you that first day when you gave me a second chance. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Julian cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. You are extraordinary, Nina. You always were. I just helped you see it. And then he kissed her, soft and tender and filled with promise. Nina melted into his arms, feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. So what happens now? Nina asked. Now, Julian said, pulling her close again. We see where this takes us. No more tests, no more games. Just us. Building something real together. I like the sound of that. They stood together under the twinkling lights, two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. Nina thought back to that morning 3 weeks ago when she had stopped to help a stranger. She had thought she was losing everything. Instead, she had found her purpose, her place, and the love of her life. 6 months later, the Grand Vista Hotel was hosting another celebration, but this time it was personal. Nina stood in a beautiful white dress, looking at Julian across the same rooftop garden where they had first confessed their love. Margaret sat in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face. Claire stood beside Nina as her maid of honor, beaming with happiness. Thomas, the kind doorman, was there with his family, cheering loudly as Nina and Julian exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other forever. She realized that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected moments of kindness. That single choice to help a stranger had changed everything. The universe had a funny way of working things out. You just had to be brave enough to stop and help when someone needed you, even when it cost you something. Because sometimes what looked like a loss was actually the beginning of something beautiful. Julian kissed his bride, and everyone cheered. Nina laughed through happy tears, knowing that this was just the beginning of their forever. The poor girl who missed her interview had become the beloved wife of a wonderful man. But more than that, she had discovered her own worth, found her calling, and learned that true love really does exist. And it all started with helping a stranger in a wheelchair on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The end.